Hey, I'm Taylor Dorsett, and this is the Professional Technical Interviewee. Technical interviews are hard, and every company does them differently. On this show, I interview engineering leaders to see what they look for in technical candidates, and then they perform a real technical interview with me. I hope you enjoy. Great. Well, we are back. Greg, the ball is in your court now. So we're going to do a resume review, a little different than a technical interview. I don't think we've done this on the show before. And I have a resume, actually two different resumes of mine that I have. And we kind of talk through the different reasons why I have two that you'll go through and critique, and then maybe say things you like, you don't like. But I'll let you take it from here.
Yeah, awesome. Good deal. Yeah, so thank you all for joining us on this first resume review here. This is the first time I've done one live as well. So hopefully my train of thought makes sense for everybody. But yeah, so as Taylor said, we have a couple different resumes here. This is I guess I would call it more flashier one that kind of jumps out a little bit more. First things first, I can say, as somebody who oftentimes is reviewing resumes and deciding based on a resume, are we even going to move them forward? As I talked about earlier, I've kind of had to wear that recruiter hat several times in my career. And, so first off, like for me, I personally like, this style of resume. I feel like it's way easier for me personally to digest. It's one page. I will say there probably is that age-old debate of like, as you get further on in your career, how do you get it down to one page? A couple things I would say there. One, if you've been doing this for 20 years, it's okay to have a front and back, in my opinion. Two, eventually you can get to a point where, you can just start one-lining your job and your title and where you were at. And you of course link your, most people link their website or their LinkedIn on their, on their resume. So that's cool because you can be like, hey, yeah, like if you want to know more about what I did at that job 20 years ago, that's cool. You can click on my LinkedIn and go there. But yeah, so, just wanted to call out, I personally like this style of resume. I know why we're going to review the other one. I'll call out for our folks is a lot of people's systems, track based on keywords and things like that. And so and it has to be formatted a certain way, which we'll show that here shortly. But when you can, I personally like this one. Like I said, this is easier for me to digest. I get, the smattering of the experience here, kind of what skills. This was also going to be something that I called out that I liked here is this projects section, especially, from a couple different standpoints. There are sometimes engineers that did a lot of experience in consulting and, maybe you can't name the company you worked on, but you could be like, I worked for a large retailer and this is what we helped them build. I love those little blurbs. Sometimes you might have been somewhere where you can actually like directly link, like you did here, Taylor. But I personally like to, dive in to projects. I know it's becoming more and more of a trend too, where when you can like link to the GitHub repositories and things like that, where you can just start poking around code. Again, I had somebody apply recently that did that. That was really cool because it was like this Clojure side project that he was working on, where he, I'm going to do a bad job explaining it, but it was like with like Elvish, like Lord of the Rings with Clojure, and it opened up a whole can of worms that I won't get into today, but it was just a really cool conversation. So definitely like the projects call out here as well. And then of course you can't leave off your education. A few things and then the last thing that I like to, Taylor, is you called out your roles that you had before you dove into being a full-time engineer. Yeah, so as I'm looking at this is like, in my opinion, more of a, like we talked about this before, more of a vision of good than a vision of calling out all the things. So what I would say is I can kind of peel it back is, if you're entry level and you're getting into the job, a couple things that I would call out here is in your experience section, A lot of times I see this project section flipped over here, and it's just
Mm.
like all the projects you worked on at the boot camp, which is good to have that on there. But oftentimes people remove all the rest of this experience. And then for me, it's like, where did you come from? I know most of the time people going to boot camps had some sort of career. I know that's becoming less and less. And I could get into I actually did a whole interview not too long ago on, do you just go right to a boot camp versus going to a traditional school and things like that. But I'll say that for another conversation. But all of you have past experience most of the time, and add that on there. A great example was, I interviewed a boot camp grad who was an accountant prior, and he was like an account manager. So like, he walked me through how in his role he had to interact with all these different departments, and he had employees, and he had all this stuff that he had to go through. And I was like, holy cow, it's different, but you basically just described the role of an engineer. Like, as an engineer, you got to work with all these other people to get software, which we talked about a little bit earlier. And so don't miss those on your resume, just because, I mean, it's good to call out. So that would be one section I would call on the experiences. I like that you did that. I would just give recommendations to others, because sometimes it's like, it looks like you just joined a boot camp and it dropped out of thin air.
On that same note, like, and this kind of ties into how do we get this onto one page, right? Like, I worked at, I think, 3, maybe 4 different recruiting agencies. So I went back and forth, like, how do I do this? And then I was like, oh, I can kind of basically lump this all into one, because as an engineering manager, you don't care what recruiting agencies I worked at, right? It doesn't matter to you at all in the past. But knowing that I was a technical
Yep.
recruiter is relevant, at least to some extent, right? So what I try to do is, okay, this is multiple different jobs that I basically put under kind of one section. So one that helps with space, and then 2 that also leaves, I don't know, I can write what I want to there versus having to, describe a specific company that I worked for some amount of time. So I think that helps. I think a lot of people are like, oh, I spent 10 years in sales before I got into engineering, or as a teacher for 5 years, right? At 3 different schools. Like, how do I do that? You can list the individual jobs, but I think doing something like this, where you kind of, elementary school teacher, 5 different years, I served at Cook County and other school districts, right? Like, something like that shows, okay, great.
Yep.
There's the little bit that at least I have some context, and I don't have to be like, it doesn't take up your entire resume, right?
Yeah, no, that is a great call out. A great thing that you have on your resume. And like we talked about earlier, in those soft skills, like, most companies have something called core competencies that they review people on, and things like that. And most likely, a flavor of teamwork, a flavor of collaboration, a flavor of communication, a flavor of written versus verbal is going to likely make its way into that. So, like you just called out there, Taylor, saying, hey, I was in sales, and here are the 3 to 5 bullets of the things I did in sales that I think are applicable to this. Because it's like, yeah, like, maybe, like, pulling in your sales example, like, maybe you were somebody who had to get on a call, understand what a customer was saying, and then figure out what is it that you sell. Cool. That's like translatable to a dev. Like, a product owner and a designer is like telling you, this is the thing we need to build, and then you're in taking it and you're trying to figure out, okay, where do I go from here? Who else do I need to get involved? And there's like all these different things. And yeah, I love that example of that, kind of bucketing everything together, is great. And then, yeah, still definitely call out your projects, link to your GitHub and all of that. And then, something else I see oftentimes left off on education is, at least for me, like, I personally like list the different, like, certifications and things like that, because that's becoming more and more relevant in the world of, like, you got this Google cert, or this AWS cert, or this Microsoft cert. I know that has like the negativeness at a bit in the engineering world, because, like, some people just go out and they are really good test takers and they get those certs. But that is just something to add on there. Like, personally, like, I put on there that I went to an online web boot camp, and put that I got X cert, and things like that. which I think is good. The other piece is, and we won't challenge you on this one, Taylor, but I love that you called out the skills section here. What I would just on the flip side tell people is, if you're going to put it there, make sure you feel confident in talking about it, because I've seen people just list like 70 things in this section that they're good at, and maybe it's just me as a manager, but I'll pick one of the most random things on there and be like, tell me about this, because I want to see, so if you're gonna put it there, be ready and willing to speak to it, because you might not even be interviewing for a Ruby on Rails position, but I might out of the blue just be like, so what have you built in Ruby on Rails? What did you like about that project?
Yeah.
And just to see, like, are you just listing stuff to list stuff, or is it actually a skill that you have?
And as you can probably tell by how I spell Postgres, some of these things shouldn't necessarily be out here, right? Like, I have used Postgres, but if someone asked me any question past like how do you query for like very basic things in Postgres, especially when I made this resume, I would have been like, like I would Google how to do that, right? Like that would be my answer.
Yep.
So yeah, I have seen people in the past put like their level of competency in these given skills. But if I put Postgres on there and my level of competency is a 1 out of 3, like should it really even be on there? Right. Like I guess
Yeah,
that's
I'm
the
not.
question.
Yeah, I mean, I don't know if I have like an actual opinion on like the scaled system, because I do find it, as another cool way that somebody like stood out on their resume. But I agree with you. Like, one, is anybody going to rate themselves really bad? And if they are going to rate themselves low, you probably just want to leave it off.
Right.
In the first place. So my rule of thumb would probably just be, put it on your resume if you feel like you're competent enough. Like, don't put iOS because you dabbled in it once. Like, if you put iOS on your resume, I'm assuming that you're going to be able to help build an iOS app. You maybe can't do it on your own, but like, if I gave you the right team and the right parameters, you know how to write iOS code on there. Or, you could do on the flip side of what I have on my resume, and that I'm trying to remember how I put it on mine, but I kind of divided up my technical skills in the sense of like, this is what I can be hands on the keyboard
Mm,
from a technical standpoint, and then this is the technical stuff that I know enough to be dangerous. So if you send me into a client meeting, like, I know enough about the build of an iOS app that I can talk you through it, but I can't write the code. So I kind of
mm,
divided up my skills section to be, here's like, I can put my hands on the keyboard when it comes to JavaScript, but I could tell you, why you might want to choose, a content management system within PHP versus wanting to build a, Java or .NET backend, because
mhm.
I've done it enough. But I would not list .NET on my resume as I could write it, but I know enough about .NET to be dangerous
Sure.
about why it's used maybe over other scenarios.
Yeah, I like the distinction. I might even make like a core competencies versus like skills, right? And maybe try to make that
Yeah.
distinction clearer in some way, but I like that idea.
Yeah, so that would be something that I would put there. But yeah, I mean, overall, I like the layout of this. There's so many tools out there too, by the way. Like, I know most of us that are engineers aren't like UI people, unless you're like a front end dev. Like I like the UI stuff because I gravitated to the front end. But there's so many tools out there. I mean, you can use Canva. I used Credle to build mine, and it was super easy. I just typed in my experience, and they had all these different templates, and then I just, it just builds, and and then I can kind of move things around and stuff. But there are so many tools out there at this point to make your resume look pretty, even if you're not somebody who knows how to do that.
Yeah, I think this one is Enhanced CV, which is free to
Oh, yep,
use.
yep, yeah, you
Yeah,
have it on
so
them.
the trade-off is
Ooh,
they throw it at the bottom, right, of your resume, which I'm not gonna lie, I think I made one version where I took it off, and then I was like, well, let's give them credit. No one cares if I use some resume generator. And I think
yeah,
it's
I
free
agree.
the
I
first
wouldn't
time
care
you
that you
use it.
used a resume generator at
Yeah.
all. But yeah, so there's so many resume generators out there that you can use. Yeah, like that. That's what it says right in its headline. It's free to use. So I've literally been going through this with some folks in my network, and it's like there's so many tools. Like you don't need to. And honestly, there are so many tools that I guess we can hop over to this resume because it's kind of starting to become relevant with this one. And like you said, this one here is specific to, those candidate tracking systems where they're automatically screening you out based on, keywords and, how it's formatted and all that. I'm sure you all have uploaded your resume into a system that then it pulls all your information and you have to retype it all in. Hopefully more and more, like, honestly, that might be a red flag at your company at this point. Like if they're not using like Greenhouse or Lever or like one of the other, I forget the other names, but there's like, if they're not using one of those, like that might be a first red flag of like the company you're going to, because you're like, oh my God, I had to upload this thing and then it didn't parse all my information properly. I got to retype it all in anyways. And then it's funny because on the recruiter side, you're not even reading all that information that you retyped in anyways. You're only looking at the resume. So I won't get into that, but maybe that's a red flag right there. Is like, how many steps did you have to go through just to get your resume through them? Hopefully, I mean, a lot of the newer companies are using, like I said, Lever, Greenhouse, or some of those ones where it literally is you just fill out a couple of questions, you attach your resume, and you're done, which
I'll
is
give
great.
you one counterpoint here, Greg, because we just switched to iSIMS, which I don't think I can get sued for saying I don't like working with iSIMS, right? Like iSIMS is not a great backend ATS, if you ask me. And I was like, why would we ever switch to this? And the answer I got was, well, because we had Lever before, and I was like, Lever's pretty good, right? Like, especially if you're working through engineering roles, it's pretty good. And the answer I got is Lever's great if we have a handful of engineering roles that we're trying to scale up, but we also hire we have the majority of our I think close to like 1,000-person staff is not engineers, right? Or even people who are in corporate office roles. There are a lot of like plant managers and like chefs and like frontline workers that are like in these warehouses packing and sorting stuff into different boxes and home chef meals. And they said for that type of stuff, that's what people are used to, right? You're used to applying in this type of system, and you probably already have an iSIMS account, so it's easier for them versus a Lever where they're like, what is this newer, fancier looking thing? And I was like, okay, that's sort of the only difference I've ever heard for using some old software that isn't
no,
great.
I'm glad
That does make
you
sense.
explained it. That makes total sense when you're thinking about the other roles. Gosh, well, somebody needs to get Greenhouse and Lever and those other ones to catch up. Or yeah, I don't know, maybe as a company you just have to bite the bullet and invest in two pieces of software. I mean, I don't know. I don't know what the right answer is for that there, but I can tell you the amount of probably good engineering candidates that are lost because they're parsed out by a system is probably more than the good of that system. But yeah, so I mean, but this, I mean, still is a good resume for me. Like, I'm not gonna, give people like boot somebody out because I saw this fancy one versus this one. Like, at least in my opinion, like, especially like when I'm hiring back end developers. Like, again, I'm, you're a back end developer because that's what you like to do. You're not in the UI, you're not in that front end and stuff. So like your eye isn't towards making things pretty, your eye is towards making things look, making things functional. So I mean, this still does the trick. It has, all of the information on it that I need. I'm sure you've done all the due diligence to make sure that this, parses its way through, the right systems and all of that.
I'll give, I think it's Leet Resume. This is what I have in the title there. A shout out. It's a service where I think if you have more than like 2 years of experience, they will make a resume for you for free. And it's specifically designed to get through ATS systems. So they're like, I think I sent them this other resume and then they sent me back this one and they said, use this one for ATSs. And it did seem to have a higher rate in my last job search of like, oh, it would actually get a response. What I'll tell people, as soon as I got an actual interview lined up, I would send the manager the other resume and say, hey, you probably got my ugly resume. That's just to get through your applicant tracking system. This is my pretty resume. And then at least hopefully they were looking at that one when we were talking instead of this.
That's that's a really good piece of advice. The other thing that seems to happen more commonly when it's these resumes these like longer or these formatted resumes, this is where I trend to see them go more than like a couple pages. And again, just back to that other point, like narrow your focus down, like you called out, Taylor, combine jobs, or if it's all similar, I mean, just say software engineer at this company date to date, and it's just one line, one line, one line. We can always speak to those things, but like it is so hard as a recruiter to parse through your 20 year 7 pages. Not to say again that I rule anybody out from it, but like we're looking at a lot of resumes. The easier you can make our job, the better. And then I guess the only other thing that I would point out here is, again, just word of caution. I know this is specific for the candidate tracking, but again, this is again where, because I know it's candidate tracking, where people will just list out all the things. Just be careful what you put there. Because if I see technologies and I see that you put vue.js on there, I'm going to assume vue.js, not that you dabbled in it, that you can speak to why. I might actually ask you, you have both Vue and React JS on your resume. Can you explain to me, maybe in your personal opinion, why you would choose one or the other? Or do you have a favorite of the two, and why? Again, just because like I try and call BS on, people's resumes. I do everything I can to like filter it out, because as all good, interview managers know, our engineering's time that we're pulling away for that technical interview is very, very valuable. So I do my absolute best to do everything I can to make sure I am not sending somebody forward that's going to take up, because we at least have 3 engineers on our interview. It's an hour long, and I'm like, that's 3 hours of dev time lost. That's like maybe
Plus
a
prep,
couple.
plus feedback, right? Like it's a
Yeah,
lot.
exactly. So I'm like doing all that math in my head, and I'm like, oh man, we could have probably fixed 2 production bugs in that time. I'm like, oh, my queue of bugs would be just a little bit smaller for that. So, but yeah, I mean, and I'm trying to think. There's not much else that I think I would add. Another tool out there that's pretty popular for folks is Grammarly. You can run what you're writing through on Grammarly. I actually have the Grammarly app just installed on my computer, so it critiques me everywhere that I'm writing all the time. I have the free version. You can pay for the paid version. I would highly recommend at least paying for it for a little bit, where you can get all those other little notes about, because it'll be like, oh, you could reword this differently on the premium, or you can just be like me, where you just keep guessing and then eventually you get through. But that's another tool that I would recommend is, just running what you're writing through. Have a couple other sets of eyes. I'm fortunate that my partner is she's in marketing and writes a lot of content, so I have her and some others that I can be like, hey, can you just like read this from an outsider's perspective? Like, what does this mean to you? But that's another little tidbit I could give, is just like look at what you're writing, get some feedback on it, make sure a lot of recruiters in our world aren't super technical. So have a couple non-technical friends read your resume and
Hmm.
give you feedback on it. Doesn't make sense to them, because a lot of times people that are reading resumes, you need to write it in a way that speaks to them, but also write it in a way that when it gets to the technical person, they're not going to be like, why are they here?
Yeah. I think I try to be pretty deliberate on like mentioning projects, like the broadest. Like I think this first one at level is like talking about dynamic homepage company generation. It's pretty broad, and I don't know exactly what that might mean to some individual. But then listing like these are the tools I worked on that with. So I'm assuming I've given you a little bit of a teaser. So if we're talking about we're doing an interview, we
Yep.
say, hey, you mentioned you build this dynamic homepage company generation. What is that? And I'm like, oh, I can actually tell you about the project, right? It's like I think of those as like give them a little teaser, just so they're interested, and then you're going to expand on that. I think there's a really fine line between like you're listing out a whole project and everything you did on it in a resume versus like you say, I use JavaScript and Node to build web apps. Like there's a lot
Yeah.
of area between that, right?
Yeah, no, and you brought up a good example here, which I'm glad you did. If you've been at a company for quite a while, even if it's just the same product, you might have worked on several different things for that company. And I do like what you called out here. So, adding one line of like, hey, I worked on this, and this is the tools that we used. Hey, I worked on this, and this is the tools that we use. Because again, flexing that muscle of like, because you might work at one company where you're a software engineer, but your company has several products that are, we all know those companies out there that for some reason or another have several different frameworks and backend languages that they use. And you're like, we won't even get into the stories as to why that happens. But you might be an engineer that got to touch all those different areas of your varying products at your company. And so listing those out, being like, hey, I worked like you just did there. Like I worked on this port of our app that I did JavaScript. And then you might be like, hey, my next project at our company, I was really heavy backend and did XYZ. That stuff, I'm glad you called that out, Taylor, because I like that stuff versus just being like, I'm an engineer at this company and I've touched these 10 languages and frameworks, etc. But it's like, no, I built X in this and X in this, X in this. It shows me, that you've had some flexibility in your work.
Yeah, for sure. If you go back to the other resume, so I would say this is another piece of advice on like having someone else view it. I can't believe that I've sent this resume out because now I'm seeing so many issues. Like if you look under levels.fyi, there's a section that just says date period right under the levels bit, like right at the top of it.
Oh
It just says
yeah.
date period instead of the
Oh
years.
my gosh.
And
I didn't even catch it. And it's also
the
missing your
location
location.
just, yeah. And I think at the very bottom it says location, just location, right? Like, and Postgres is misspelled in one spot. Like this is wild to me that I've sent this resume out and gotten job offers from it. So I would say, one, maybe typos aren't going to kill you, but two, who knows what I didn't get callbacks because someone goes literally the
Yeah,
first space, there's
more
a
often
missing
than
thing.
not, a typo is
Yeah.
probably not gonna kill you moving
Yeah.
forward. But again, you are 100% correct. Before I fired off my last resume, like a year plus ago when I was in my search, I had several people's eyes on it, and again, thick skin. You're gonna get feedback. I mean, it's just like when your code gets reviewed, you're like, really? Yeah, okay, I get it. But yeah, I mean, that's the same thing. Fire off. Yeah, I guess this is a great example of fired off, because this is the type of stuff that like my wife would pick up on. She would be like, did you mean? And that's why I said fired off to people that aren't necessarily in our industry,
Yeah.
because people in our industry, I'm not gonna lie, Taylor, you probably would have sent this to me. I would have glossed over all of it and would have been like, yeah, that experience looks good, that experience looks good, and I would have never probably looked at some of those other details that you just called out, because like my eyes, I've been doing this for so long, are so trained to go to specific areas. But yeah, having somebody else, that's trusted, in your network, whether it's a friend or family member, old colleague, etc., just fire it off to a few people and be like, what do you see?
I think you said code review earlier, like similar to a code review on like something critical, right? Like I think often whenever I'm pushing something to prod, or it's like we have to make sure this is on the homepage, right? Like this can't break on this release. Like if it's not too crazy, I'll go like literally line by line to make sure every single line, like nothing's wrong, like we're fine, right? And like a resume is not that long. Like if you go line by line looking at every section, I would have caught those things. Right? It's just like I clearly was like,
Yeah,
it's good, right? And I think because my eyes do the same thing, right? I'm like, this is the spaces where I look normally, right? But if I
yeah.
actually went through and looked at every bit, I'd find that, I can't believe this is missing, right? So a good habit to get into if you're, this is a pretty important document.
Yeah, and I mean, and there's all those other tools out there. Like when I used Credle, what I liked was Credle gave me a shareable link that when I sent it out to those folks for feedback, they were able to just comment right in that link. I mean, you could have it be on a Google Doc or whatever. What I liked about Credle was I didn't need to worry like did I share the Google Doc? Are they a Google user? Like it was just they got a web link and we're able to go right into that web link and add comments.
For sure. I'm trying to think if there's anything else I add in or mention about resumes. Oh, location. I just have Chicago listed right now. I would even though I live in Montana right now, I'd probably still list Chicago because like I'm looking at I'd probably be interviewing with Chicago companies. But I might write Chicago remote or something like that. Sometimes I see people with their whole address on there. Say, please don't put your whole address on a resume, just because
Yeah,
as a person who was a I don't know 22-year-old recruiter seeing hundreds of resumes a day and they all got printed off and who knows where half those resumes are now. You never know who's going to end up with literally your exact address, and they don't need
yeah.
it, right? Nobody needs your address. If you get an offer, they'll ask you for it, right? So you maybe put the city or the city you're looking to interview in, right? And that's about all I would put.
Yeah, city's okay. I mean, it's okay, honestly, to just put remote these
Yeah.
days. You can put city/remote, like you said. Definitely agree. You don't need to put that. You have a website, so link that there. If you don't have a website, have the little LinkedIn icon with a link to it, or again, with these websites, you can have it just display the LinkedIn logo, and then you can click on the logo. Same thing if you want to link out to your GitHub. There are websites where you can build it where it just has a little GitHub icon, and then you can click out to your public. I guess one thing I didn't mention, now that I'm thinking about GitHub, is if you are going to link to your GitHub, make sure you went through and you cleaned up your public GitHub. Make sure it's just a good representation of what you want out there. Or if it is something that you were just dabbling in and it's going to be messy, you can either flip it to private or just put it in the documentation. Like, hey, this here was literally me just exploring with Go. Like
Mhm.
I don't know Go, but I left it here because I wanted to show you that I explored these other 7 technologies that are out there. But just drop a note in there, just so you don't like randomly get somebody who they sent the resume to like their technical person and they're like, hey, review this, and they're like looking through it and they're like, all this is garbage. Why is this garbage? And then you might be somebody who listed Go on your resume, and then they're like, oh, Go's on their resume and this Go is garbage. Like what? No pun intended. Do not pass Go. Ha, joke there. But yeah, dad joke. Sorry, I had to sneak it in. But yeah, so just make sure you clean up your GitHub, and anything that's public, you want it to be public. And like I said, it's okay. I actually personally love seeing that people explored a bunch of technologies on their public GitHub, but just add a comment that you're exploring it and why you were exploring it. That way, like when a dev looks at it, they're like, oh yeah, I'm not going to judge them on this because they had somebody at their company was like, hey, can you like just explore Go
Mhm.
and see if it's good for this functionality? And then they like did that and then like just left it, which is cool. I like to see that, but just like tell me why it's there.
Yeah.
So yeah, I guess I didn't mention that earlier when we were talking about linking to projects and GitHubs, but just like careful what you wish for. It's awesome to have on there, but clean it up if you're gonna link to it.
Anything else you want to
Yeah,
mention or things that people should keep in mind with their resumes?
I don't think so. No, I think we've talked about resumes for as long as people can talk about resumes.
Cool. Great. Well, definitely check out resources online. I mentioned Lead Resume, Enhanced CV. Like those are some easy ways, especially if you're like, I don't even know where to start, right? Just start putting information in there and you'll be like, oh, you can start chipping away at it, right? And then you can optimize as you go. Greg, thanks so much. Can you share a little bit or give us a recap on Aclaimant, and then mention anything that might be coming up that people should check out or any roles that you may have open in the future?
Yeah, for sure. Yeah. So just to, quick recap, Acclaimant, we're digitizing kind of the risk management, space. So safety, OSHA claims, whether you're the user on that end or you're on the flip side. We just this year made it on the Inc. 5000. So we just recently announced that. I think we've announced that we're also making it on Crane's Best Places to Work. So yeah, great place to work, cool people solving problems that not everybody wants to solve, but we really enjoy doing it. And like I said, if you like Clojure, you like pair programming, definitely a spot to be. I don't have any open roles currently, but I would expect, as like any startup, as we hit certain revenue targets, more roles and stuff open. So I would expect probably late fall, early into the new year, we'll be hiring likely a front-end engineer, a Clojure engineer. My hope is to bring on another associate engineer, as our current associate, eventually in the coming months will graduate, out of that associate title. And then if any product folks are listening, at some point here, we'll be hiring a product manager as well, which that's kind of I didn't even get into that, but I wear a lot of our product/projects. I literally am the project manager for our product right now. So do whatever we need as a startup to get us moving forward.
Great. Well, thanks so much, Greg. It's been a blast.
Yeah, awesome, Taylor. Thank you so much for having me. I appreciate it.
Absolutely. Thank you for watching the technical interview portion of the Professional Technical Interviewee. If you want to tackle this interview question, you can find it at github.com/professional technical interviewee. New episodes are released on the first 4 Thursdays of each month. Find us on YouTube at youtube.com/Taylor Dorsett, or on Apple Podcast or Spotify. Make sure you subscribe so you don't miss out on new episodes. And remember, keep practicing.